My name is Bethany, and I'm 28 years old. I've always been driven to succeed, and my job as a marketing manager at a prestigious firm was my dream come true. I worked hard to prove myself, often putting in late nights and weekends to ensure our campaigns were always on point. My boss, Rachel, was tough but fair, or so I thought. She'd often praise my work, but there was always an underlying expectation to do more, to push myself to the limit. I remember my first year at the company, I was working 60-hour weeks, and Rachel would still find ways to pile more work on my plate. I'd leave the office late at night, exhausted, but still feeling like I wasn't doing enough. As time went on, the hours crept up, 70, 80, 90 hours a week. I'd work through lunch, skip breaks, and barely have time to breathe. Rachel would send emails at midnight, expecting me to respond immediately. I'd wake up to her messages, my heart racing, feeling like I was always on call. My colleagues would whisper about the burnout rate at our company, but I never thought it would happen to me. I was young, ambitious, and convinced I could handle anything. But the truth was, I was slowly losing myself in the process. I'd forgotten what it felt like to have a life outside of work, to enjoy simple things like reading a book or taking a walk without checking my phone. Rachel's expectations were suffocating me, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep up this pace. Little did I know, my journey was just beginning, and it would take me to places I never expected. I was assigned to lead a high-profile campaign, and my boss expected nothing but perfection. I found myself working 100-hour weeks, barely sleeping, and living on coffee. My days blurred together in a haze of meetings, emails, and deadlines. I'd collapse onto my bed at night, exhausted, only to wake up and do it all again. My body started to pay the price. I developed chronic migraines, and my eyes would blur from staring at screens for hours. My mental health began to deteriorate too. I'd get anxious in meetings, and simple conversations became overwhelming. I knew I needed to slow down, but my boss wouldn't let up. "This campaign is make or break for your career," she'd say, her voice firm but laced with a hint of menace. I tried to push through, but my body and mind were screaming for relief. One night, as I worked late, I received an email from my boss. "Where's the latest report?" it read. I stared at the screen, my eyes welling up with tears. I was already at breaking point, and this email felt like the final straw. I scheduled a meeting with my boss, hoping to find some relief. "Rachel, I need to talk to you about my workload," I said, trying to sound calm. "I'm working 100-hour weeks, and I'm starting to feel the effects. Can we prioritize tasks or bring in some extra help?" My boss leaned back in her chair, her expression unimpressed. "You're not handling the pressure well, are you?" she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Other people manage just fine. What's wrong with you?" I felt a surge of frustration. "I'm not asking for special treatment," I said, trying to keep my cool. "I'm asking for a sustainable workload. This isn't healthy." My boss raised an eyebrow. "If you can't handle the demands of this job, maybe you're not the right person for it." I left the meeting feeling defeated, knowing I'd have to find another way to cope with the workload. I started looking for resources online, reading about burnout and work-life balance. But for now, I had to get back to work. The campaign wasn't going to finish itself, and my boss was waiting. My workload increased exponentially as the deadline for the campaign drew near. I was tasked with managing multiple teams, coordinating with designers, writers, and developers, and ensuring everything was perfect. My inbox was flooded with emails, and my phone rang nonstop. I worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and determination. But despite my best efforts, I couldn't keep up. Projects were falling through the cracks, and my team was starting to feel the strain. My boss would check in daily, sometimes twice a day, demanding updates and pushing for more results. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of responsibility, with no lifeline in sight. One day, I received an email from my boss, CCing the entire team. Expectations are not being met, it read. I expect to see significant improvement immediately. I felt a knot in my stomach as I read the email, knowing I was already working at maximum capacity. How could I possibly do more? I started to wonder if I was cut out for this job, if I was somehow failing. The doubts crept in, making it harder to focus. I was running on fumes, and I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. I stopped attending happy hour gatherings with my colleagues, opting instead to grab a quick dinner at my desk. I'd miss lunch meetings with friends, cancel plans at the last minute, and barely respond to texts. My relationships began to fray. Colleagues would whisper about my absence from team-building activities, and friends would ask if I was okay. I'd promised to catch up soon, but weeks would go by, and I'd still be buried under work. One evening, my best friend Sarah called me, concerned. "Hey, where have you been?" she asked. "I've been meaning to call you back," I said, feeling guilty. "Work's just been crazy." "Crazy?" she repeated. "You used to love your job. Now it feels like it's consuming you. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just feel really overwhelmed right now." Sarah's tone softened. "We need to catch up soon, not just over the phone. Maybe we can grab brunch this weekend?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, that sounds great." But as I hung up, I knew I'd likely cancel on her too. I stopped sleeping through the night, waking up to the sound of my alarm, and then lying awake, my mind racing with deadlines and tasks. I'd drag myself to work, my eyes heavy with fatigue. My body ached from sitting for hours, and my head would throb with migraines. I started to notice my hands shaking slightly as I typed, and my concentration began to slip. I'd read emails multiple times, struggling to understand the simplest messages. Anxiety crept in, making my heart pound in my chest. I'd get short of breath and my palms would sweat. I'd try to calm myself down, but it seemed like a losing battle. One day, as I was working on a presentation, my computer screen began to blur, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I gripped the edge of my desk, trying to steady myself. A colleague noticed and came over to ask if I was okay. "You look really pale," she said, concern etched on her face. "Maybe you should take a break." I nodded, grateful for her concern, but I knew I couldn't afford to take time off. The deadline was looming, and my boss was expecting results. I took a few deep breaths and tried to focus, but my body and mind were screaming for relief. I went to my boss's office, hoping she could see the toll the workload was taking on me. "Rachel, I'm struggling to keep up," I said, trying to explain my situation. "I'm working nonstop, and I'm starting to feel the effects." My boss looked at me, her expression unyielding. "You're not meeting expectations," she said, her voice firm. "You need to step up your game. Other people in this company are working just as hard, if not harder." I felt a surge of frustration. "That's not the point," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The point is, I'm burning out. I need some support or help." My boss raised an eyebrow. "You're a professional," she said. "Handle it." I left her office feeling defeated, wondering if I was truly alone in this struggle. As I walked back to my desk, I felt like I was drowning, with no one to throw me a lifeline. My boss's words echoed in my mind, "Handle it." It seemed like she didn't care that I was barely holding on. I started to wonder if anyone would notice if I just disappeared. Would anyone even care? The thought sent a chill down my spine, and I felt more isolated than ever. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart racing and my chest tight. I couldn't breathe. I threw off the covers and stumbled out of bed, trying to catch my breath. I made my way to the bathroom, flipping on the light. My reflection stared back at me, and I barely recognized the person looking back. Dark circles under my eyes, skin pale, hair disheveled. I felt like I was staring at a stranger. Suddenly, my legs gave out, and I collapsed to the floor. I lay there, my body shaking, and my mind reeling. How did it come to this? I thought about all the late nights, the endless emails, the constant pressure. And for what? A job that was slowly killing me. I knew I couldn't keep going on like this. Something had to change. I slowly got to my feet, determination rising up within me. I would not let my job destroy me. I would take control of my life, no matter what it took. I went to the kitchen, made myself a cup of tea, and sat down at the table. I pulled out a piece of paper and started writing. I wrote about my job, my boss, my health. I wrote about how I felt trapped and helpless. As I wrote, something shifted inside me. I felt a sense of clarity and purpose that I hadn't felt in months. I knew what I had to do. I would stand up for myself, even if it meant standing alone. I started documenting everything, my work hours, emails, messages. I kept a record of every conversation with my boss, every project deadline, every request. I began to seek support from HR, asking questions about company policies and procedures. I also reached out to colleagues, discreetly asking if they had similar experiences with our boss. Some were open about their struggles, while others were tight-lipped. I realized I wasn't alone in this fight. I started to build a case against my boss's behavior, gathering evidence and testimonials. I knew I had to be careful, that one misstep could mean trouble. But I was determined to stand up for myself. I scheduled a meeting with HR to discuss my situation, hoping to get some guidance on how to navigate this toxic work environment. As I prepared for the meeting, I felt a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in months. I was taking control of my life, and I was ready to fight for what I deserved. I walked into the HR office, my head held high, and my documents in hand. "I need to report some concerns about my manager's behavior," I said, my voice firm. The HR representative listened attentively, her expression neutral. "Let's discuss the details," she said, her pen poised over her notebook. I met with the HR representative, and she listened to my concerns. She asked questions, took notes, and assured me she'd look into it. But days turned into weeks, and I heard nothing. I followed up with her, but she seemed evasive. "We're still investigating," she said. "It takes time." I felt frustration building up inside me. I had expected more support from HR. I started to wonder if I was just a small cog in a giant machine, if anyone would even notice if I disappeared. My boss seemed to sense my determination, and she started to push back harder. She gave me impossible deadlines, questioned my work, and made snide comments. I felt like I was walking on eggshells, never knowing when she'd strike next. One day, she called me into her office, her voice dripping with condescension. "I've been reviewing your work," she said. "It's not meeting expectations. You need to do better." I bit back my response, knowing that reacting would only make things worse. But inside, I was seething. I left her office, feeling defeated, but I knew I couldn't give up. I had to keep fighting, for myself and for my career. I took a deep breath and continued to document everything, every slight, every snub. I was building a case, and I was going to see it through to the end. I stood outside my boss's office, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath and walked in. "Rachel, we need to talk," I said, my voice firm. My boss looked up from her computer, a hint of annoyance on her face. "What is it?" she asked, her tone dismissive. I walked over to her desk and dropped a thick stack of papers in front of her. "This is the evidence I've been collecting," I said. "Emails, messages, records of my work hours. I think it's time we discuss the unrealistic expectations you've been placing on me." My boss's expression changed, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. She began to flip through the papers, her eyes scanning the pages. "What are you trying to prove?" she asked, her voice slightly defensive. "I'm trying to prove that I'm being taken advantage of," I said. "I'm working 100-hour weeks, and it's taking a toll on my health. I want some changes. I want a more realistic workload, and I want some support." My boss leaned back in her chair, a calculating look in her eyes. "What makes you think you're entitled to special treatment?" she asked. "I'm not asking for special treatment," I said. "I'm asking for fair treatment. I want to be able to do my job without sacrificing my well-being." The air was thick with tension as we stared each other down. I knew this was a turning point, and I was determined to come out on top. My boss's face turned red, and she leaned forward, her voice rising. "You think you're entitled to question my management style?" she said. "You're just an employee, not a manager. You don't know what's best for this company." I stood my ground, my voice firm. "I'm not questioning your management style. I'm questioning the impact it's having on my health and well-being," I said. "I have a right to be treated with respect and fairness." The conversation escalated, with both of us raising our voices. Finally, my boss slammed her hand on the desk. "Get out," she said. "I'll deal with you later." I walked out of her office, my heart racing. I knew I'd taken a risk, but I couldn't keep quiet anymore. The next day, I received an email from HR. "We've received your complaint," it said. "We'll be conducting an investigation." I breathed a sigh of relief, hoping that finally someone would listen. But as the days went by, I realized that the company was just going through the motions. They didn't want to rock the boat, didn't want to confront the truth. My boss continued to manage me, still pushing for more work, more results. I was trapped in a never-ending cycle, and I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I decided to take a stand and file a formal complaint with the company's board of directors. I detailed everything: the excessive workload, the lack of support, the toxic work environment. Weeks went by, and I heard nothing. Then, one day, I received a call from the CEO's office. "We'd like to schedule a meeting with you," the assistant said. I arrived at the meeting room, my heart pounding. The CEO and several board members were seated around the table. "We've reviewed your complaint," the CEO said. "We apologize for the difficulties you've faced. We'll be implementing changes to ensure that no one else has to go through what you've been through." I listened, stunned. "What about my role?" I asked. The CEO nodded. "We've decided to offer you a new position, one that better aligns with your skills and well-being. You'll be working directly with us to implement the changes we've discussed." I left the meeting room, feeling a mix of relief and vindication. It wasn't easy, but I'd stood up for myself, and it had paid off. As I walked out of the office building, I realized that I'd learned something valuable: the importance of self-advocacy. I'd grown as a person, and I was ready for whatever came next. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of closure and new beginnings. I knew that this was just the start of a new chapter in my life, one where I'd prioritize my well-being and stand up for what I deserve. I sat in my new office, surrounded by familiar walls, but everything felt different. I'd been through a battle, and I'd come out on top. I thought back to the long hours, the endless emails, the toxic work environment. It was a nightmare, but it had taught me something valuable. I'd learned to stand up for myself, to prioritize my well-being, and to advocate for what I deserved. I thought about my former boss, her words still echoing in my mind. "You're not meeting expectations." I'd let those words define me for too long, but I'd finally found my voice, and I'd used it to fight back. I realized that I'd been living someone else's dream, not mine. I'd been chasing success, but at what cost? I'd lost sight of what truly mattered: my health, my relationships, my happiness. I took a deep breath, feeling a sense of clarity wash over me. I knew what I wanted now. I wanted to live a life that was authentic, a life that was mine. I wanted to work in an environment that valued its employees, that supported their growth, and that promoted well-being. I smiled to myself, knowing that I'd found a new path, one that would lead me to a brighter future. I'd learned from my mistakes, and I was ready to move forward. If you're watching this, Chances are you're struggling with something similar, I said. You're working long hours, sacrificing your well-being, and feeling like you're at the breaking point. I want you to know that you're not alone. And I want to tell you something that I wish someone had told me a long time ago. You have the power to change your situation. Set boundaries, I said. Prioritize your self-care. Take care of your physical and mental health, and don't be afraid to stand up for your rights. You deserve to be treated with respect and fairness. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're worthless or that you're not good enough. You are enough, I said. Just as you are. In this moment, you are enough. Stand up for yourself, I said. You are worth it. Thank you for listening to my story. I'll really appreciate it if you like the video, share it, and subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of stories. Thank you.